I'm not the one to have rain interfere with my Sunday morning. I'm not the kind of guy who wants to sit in their couches all comfortable and cuddly with their partners, sipping on their coffees and tea. I am the one to go outdoors and tackle the raindrops as they fall upon the land, to collect them and do something with them. And with everything, Sundays are the only days that I really like to go out and explore. Since everybody moves towards the city, I move to forests. It's better there, less people. I decided to go for a run. I knew it was slippery and the forest was not the best place to go for a run that morning, but I went anyway. I was a hard head, and that was one of the things that worked for me during my forest runs, and I enjoyed them, and it was pretty cool. And most of the time, I was really good at running. And the thing is, I knew the forest inside out, and there was no way I would forget my way out of that forest. And I was pretty confident about it. And even that day, I was pretty sure about it. So I went for the run, and the run was good. But the thing is that I was excited about the personal record I have done. And I was excited. And in that excitement, I might have let my guard down, and I could hear the rustling of the leaves in the forest. And there was a little panic that I could feel with the rain, thunder, and that creepy rustling of the leaves. I wasn't scared about the animals. I was much more scared about the serial killers. Every story I have heard about them killing the location was mostly a forest, and I was making sure that I don't go on and become next victim to one of the creepy serial killers. So in the panic, I started running. And without looking or inspecting the place where the leaves rustled, I just turned left and started running. I was in a bit of panic and was just running endlessly to the left, and I kept running. And it might have been in the state of panic and I just won't stop. And then when I did stop, there was this feeling like I was lost. And I was panicking as if the forest I knew from inside out was one of that mazes that I couldn't get out of it. And the feeling that I was being followed just increased, and the panic was now almost turning into a heart failure. And I was running towards the right, and I kept running. And I had no idea of where I was, but there was this imminent fear that someone or something is following me. And that was one of the main reasons that I just wouldn't stop. And now when I look back to it, I think how irrational and stupid I was, but in that moment, I was sure not thinking about any of it. I knew the ways, but suddenly I forgot where was the way that led me to my house. And I even knew the way back in my head, but there was nothing right now. I had nothing. So I kept running. I was running without reason. It was getting dark, and there was this sense of urgency that I had. And I must have been overworked with all the running that I passed out in the middle of the run. And I woke up and got up and just walked out of the forest to my place. I just woke up and started moving straight to the north of it. And I wasn't even a mile away from my home. I entered my home and sat on the table. And now that I was recollected back to my senses, everything became so clear. And it was the panic that was making me take the irrational decision. And I completely forgot about the house, which was just less than a mile away. But it was a good thing that I never stopped running. Sometimes it's good to not stop when something doesn't feel right. Just a week later, one of the joggers was found murdered in the forest. And since then, I don't really take the rainy runs in the forest anymore. Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. Hey y'all, my name is Troy, and I live with my wife and daughter in the gently neighborhood of New Orleans. Both me and my wife are Creole, and we're really proud of that. We have a rich and diverse heritage that we can both trace back for generations. When he was born, both were raised in New Orleans. It's our home, and neither of us would rather live anywhere else in the world. But although the city is nicknamed the Big Easy, living here has been anything but, from the heat and humidity to the gators and hurricanes. I think the sense of community down here has been forged out of suffering. And back in 2005, When we were hit by Hurricane Katrina, boy, did we suffer. So back in 2005, my family was living in this sturdy red brick 2-story here in Gently. I guess it's my fault that we went through what we did, because even after we got the hurricane warnings, I decided to keep us there. I mean, we had it for at least 4 or 5 years that time and never once had it flooded before, no matter how crazy the storms got. On top of that, the roof had almost an inch of waterproof plywood underneath it, and I laid all the shingle with my own 2 hands. I was proud of my work, to put a lot of time into it. Maybe it was my pride getting in the way, but I reckon we'd be alright. And at first, we were alright. My wife and I figured it was just another regular old hurricane, if you can call them that. But then we got the news that the levees had broken. And only then did we realize just what we were in for. The water came in fast, real fast. It flowed down the street we lived on like a river and leaked into our house wherever it could. I've grabbed all kinds of things we didn't want to lose from the ground floor and then headed upstairs to safety. Somehow, I got it into my head that they would just stop there. But I remember how scared my wife got as the water started climbing up the stairs step by step. We watched them disappear one by one until not long after, it was soaking into the carpet right there on the 2nd floor. The house had never flooded before, not even once. And then there we were feeling like we had no more than an hour before the entire place would be underwater. Our daughter was really young at the time, only just out of diapers. She can imagine how scared we were and how her crying made everything so much tenser. That's when all the power went out. Me and my wife saw this big flash of light outside, along with hearing these scary sounding sparks from outside, but it wasn't lightning. It was from the transformer down the block as it shorted out and gave up. After that, we were in darkness. I was hauling as many of my valuables and essentials as I could into the attic of her house, while my wife tried to keep the baby calm. She was hushing her, singing her little songs, but the baby was wailing something fierce. She knew something was badly wrong, and she wasn't too proud to show it. But the tide was up to our waist on the 2nd floor. We were all really starting to panic, but suddenly, it just sort of stopped. We weren't sure it had at first. I just figured it hadn't slowed down but was still rising. But sure enough, it had a swear. I could have danced for joy. Sure, almost the whole house was ruined, but as long as the water stayed just there, we wouldn't drown. And to me, that was something worth celebrating. It was about midnight when this water stopped rising and we were in total darkness, only able to see by flashlight. Our bedroom had a balcony on it, so I headed out there to get a look at the street outside. It was like a river out there, just all this rushing water flowing down the streets, and it was filthy. They had this oily black layer on the surface and trash was everywhere. All kinds of things floated past me. Anything that could float out of people's houses was just bobbing on the surface. It was a vision of utter destruction. But I'll never forget the noises coming from other people's houses. There were all these banging sounds coming from the people's roofs. What they were trying to break out of their attics was haunting, like all these houses had been turned into conference, and the people inside had been buried alive. Just this horrible boom, boom, boom that echoed all around our neighborhood, and you couldn't tell exactly where it was coming from. The water seemed to create these echoes or something, sending that sounds every which way until it seemed like the entire city was all playing drums at the same time. I'll never forget what that sounded like. I told my wife to take the kids up into the attic and try to get some sleep. But I'm not sure if she slept a wink that night. Around noon the next day, A boat full of guys wearing uniforms of some kind came along and hitched themselves to our back balcony railing. I thought we were saved and that everything after that would be okay. They drove the boat to a nearby overpass where they'd already ferried about half the neighborhood. I mean, there were about 200 or 300 scared, exhausted people already there, just waiting around to be told what to do next. But once we got there, we realized how bad the situation was. Nobody had no food with them, no water or bedding either. But we all just guessed that someone would come along with the supplies we needed. There was no way the government was just going to leave us there to die, right? Makes me angry just writing that, knowing what I do now. But they did. They just left us there to rot. Like they straight up forgotten about us. And that's when things started to get worse. I mean, really, really bad. After one night up, when the overpass, the sense of community started to come apart pretty quickly. Once people got into their heads that we had just been abandoned, it got tribal and brutal. Even people were going around taking food or money from those who wouldn't defend themselves properly. Those folks had no shame, didn't even bother to cover their faces or nothing like common bandits. They just felt entitled to other people's stuff. Not a hint of guilt about them. With little food or water, the group was all gone by the second night. And the next morning, people started trying to escape the overpass on whatever was floating by. I'm talking wheelbarrows, those little plastic swimming pools, anything that came by that looked like it might take them somewhere away from the overpass. People were getting really desperate by that point, and people were getting mean. Luckily, I had the foresight to keep my cell phone dry and charged. So the whole time we'd been up on that overpass, I'd been keeping in touch with a cousin of mine who lived uptown. He hadn't had any flooding at all, still had running water, still had power in the works. The only trouble was that the water was really deep at the end of the overpass. My wife wasn't a strong swimmer, and forget about the baby. So swimming was totally out of the question. We were trapped up there, stuck on that overpass, as the group we were with became more and more fractured, aggressive, and paranoid of each other. These mean folks were accusing people of hiding food or water. Fights was breaking now. Kids were crying. It was just awful. The third morning we were up there, something terrible happened. Some kid is messing around in the overpass railing, and I'm watching, wondering where the kid's parents are to stop them from doing something so dumb. And then the kid just slips. People screamed and ran to the edge, and so to die, there must have been a 50 or 60 foot drop into the water. I mean, it was a long way. We were expecting this kid to resurface so we could tell him where to swim, but no one comes up. He just disappeared under the water, and not a soul did anything to try and help. Only realized later that the water wasn't even all that deep, and the speed the kid fell, he would have smashed into the concrete under the water, maybe even head first from the way he fell. We watched the kid die that morning, and people were so hungry, thirsty, and tired that they almost acted like it didn't mean a thing. It was then that I decided that I had to get my family out of there before things got worse. And that's when I had an idea. You see, there was this guy on the other side of the overpass from us that had been sleeping on this inflatable pool lounger thing. The bandits in the group had tried to take it off of him at one point, and he had fought them off something fierce. But I figured if I'd asked him real nice and told him about my baby, he might just give it to me so we could get out of there. I walked across the group to him, and he gives me this look like, leave me alone. But I started explaining about my kid, how she hadn't had any food or water in God knows how long, and that if she didn't get some soon, she might die. It looks like he doesn't believe me until I point across the overpass to where they were sitting. Then the look on his face just softens, and he gives me that pool lounger without a word, just straight up gives it to me. So as discreetly as I can, as not let the bandits see us leaving, I take my family down to the water's edge and put them on the pool lounger, start wading out. Before long, I'm up to my neck in the filthy floodwater. My wife and kid are whimpering and crying, wanting to go back to the overpass because they were so scared, but I told them that wasn't happening. There was going to be a real bad scene up there, and I wasn't going to be around when it imploded. After about 2 or 3 hours of pushing that pool lounger in the direction of uptown, I'm exhausted, and our pace had slowed down a whole lot. All of a sudden, I feel the lounger snag on something in the water. Now you got to appreciate that because it was so dirty and oily, neither I nor my wife could see what it was. Like I said, I was incredibly tired, but I asked my wife to try and move it out of the way. But when she does, the thing rolls over in the water, and we actually see what it is. It was a dead guy. This old dude probably couldn't swim so well, and he looked absolutely horrified. His eyes were all milky white. His mouth was wide open and full of water, and space was all swollen and purple. I mean, he looked like a straight-up monster. And my wife and kids started hollering up a storm on the lounger, begging me to get us out of there. I had to physically move this dead body out of the way of the lounger, grabbing onto the dead guy's arm and feeling it squish my hand as I dragged him away. The smell of the body was horrific. I was gagging and retching while my wife was hysterical on the lounger. I had to yell for her to calm down, screaming at her to get her head straight, and never yell. And my wife, and I was just terrified she'd have a panic attack or something and fall off the lounge with our baby in her arms. But she does for the sake of our baby. She starts breathing right. In about an hour or so, the water starts shrinking a little until we could finally get evacuated out to a FEMA camp out in North Carolina. That was real nice to us. So good for so long. But what are we paying taxes for? Where we lived in Gently, there were all sorts of folks living in there. Black folks, white folks, land folks. And we all got abandoned just like everybody else did. I just hope that we learned enough from that whole horrible experience to be able to deal with it better next time. Something like that happens, and I pray that we do, because I'm not sure New Orleans could survive something like that again. As much as I love the place, Katrina showed me something. The community is fragile, and it doesn't take much for it to unravel. We were not meant to be together, being forced into a marriage that was not supposed to happen. I was waiting for one of the families from New York. I was an accountant, and I used to look at books of all the businesses that the Giovannis had. Now, if you don't know who the Giovanni is, let me tell you in a sentence. It is a family that you don't ever want to be associated with. My uncle moved from Italy to America, and in America, he found a friend in Roberto Giovanni, who just like my uncle, migrated from Italy to America. Giovanni's owned everything. The local shops, restaurants, politicians, the police. My uncle introduced me to Roberto Giovanni when I graduated from college. I wanted to work with the presidential candidates on his campaign. But then my uncle said, "Look, you can either work with the pricks, these politicians, or you can work for someone who puts them in his pocket and owns them." I wanted something better, so I went with my uncle and met Roberto. He was tall, and build-up Italian. He patted my shoulders and with probably a Cuban cigar in his mouth said, "So this is the guy you've been talking about, Romano?" And my uncle replied, "Yes, Roberto. He's a good kid. Good with numbers. He knows stuff." And with his hands gesturing even more, "You know stuff, papers, laws, you know," Roberto replied. "All right, Romano. Take him to the business room. Explain to him what we do and what we want to do with our money." Then he gestured to me and came closer and said, "Also, hey kid, come over here." He took a bunch of $100 bills in his hand and said, "Buy a suit, all right? Romano will take you to the shop and buy something that stands out. If you gonna manage business and numbers, you gotta act the part." That was the first day that I started working for Roberto Giovanni. After a few months of working for Roberto Giovanni, I had information on how much of the business and what all the other businesses did. Giovanni held in the list of all the politicians and cops that he had in his pockets. I became the main man of the operation and kept all the numbers in every detail. We were more like a family than a workplace. Roberta had a wife and 2 daughters, Talia and Rafina. Rafina was supposedly the wild one, and the one who could hold a grudge. She once got one of her lovers beaten up real bad because she saw her talking with some other girl. Don't even ask me what happened to the girl. She was batshit crazy, and I stayed the hell away from her. Talia, on the other hand, was quiet and probably was born in the wrong family. As years passed on, I had a strong hold on every information I had on the Giovannis, and now Roberto trusted me with everything. October 12th. It was a Monday morning, and it was raining as it has never. The streets were flooded with the overflowing sewers, and nothing but scum skimmed over those streets. I ran towards the house, and outside it was Roberto, drenched in rain, waiting for me as if his life depended on it. "Hurry, kid. I've been waiting for you. Where the hell have you been?" I replied, "The roads are blocked with scum water." And he held me by my shoulder and brought me closer. "Hey, kid. You're a wonderful kid, all right? And you will help me do these papers so much better. Now I am saying this because I like you like my own son, and I want you to know that the next thing that comes out of your mouth will decide your future." I looked at him, confused and clueless, and then he said, "I'm going to marry you to my daughter. Now I really would have liked you to marry Talia, but it's Rafina who you gonna be with. Don't ask me why I'm doing it. Just remember, with one yes, you'll be taking over everything." He married Rafina because he was scared that she might actually end up screwing the whole family over. Now I was the family, so all the business was open to me, and I was taking care of everything while Rafina was being a reckless woman, spending everything and making it impossible for all of us. Our marriage was good. We barely fought, probably because we didn't care enough about each other or the marriage. So the primary years of our marriage went on to understand each other, but there was none. Soon, the petty quarrels of the married life started, and Rafina always made sure who her father was. There was no way I could have won any arguments. She would always bring up her father and threaten me. I didn't care much about them because I knew Roberto wouldn't care. But one day, when me and Uncle Romano were out doing a business, Rafina went to her father and complained that I hit her, even though I didn't and I was out of town. I came back and Roberto called me in. "Hey kid, come in. How's everything? You feeling good? Rafina treating you good?" I chuckled and I said, "Yeah, she can be a handful sometimes." Roberto looked at me and said, "Now Rafina came to me and said you slapped her." I objected in between, and he injected and continued, "Wait. I know you didn't. You were out doing a job I sent you to. I know it. But the thing is, my daughter, she's got the habit of having everything, and now it's too late to correct it. I just want you to know, I don't have any hard feelings for you. I love you, and you're my son, alright? Stop calling me Mr. Giovanni, and call me Dad like Rafia does, okay? Completely confused by this conversation, I started heading back to my home, and I was pretty tired from the trip, when suddenly, one of the goons of Roberto roughed me up. And now the conversation made sense. I went back home with a broken nose and saw Rafina smiling. I looked at her and said, "Glad my broken nose made you smile." I woke up angry. I was pissed about the whole incident, and the incident triggered something in me. There was this sudden desire for revenge that I had. I went to see Roberto the first morning. I went and he welcomed me and asked me while laughing, "What happened to your nose? You're an alright kid. I'm sorry. I got to make my daughter happy too. And also, I got you both tickets for Italy. You live in 3 days." And that was it. That was my limit. I was done being controlled by a scum of a family. So I decided to take my revenge on them. I had 3 days to arrange everything, and so I packed up all the papers and all the documents. It was all a strong evidence against the family, and I gathered them all and went to the feds. I knew which one to go to. Every cop and politician was under the payroll. I had them on my list. This was a very big catch for the feds, and I did not want any part of it. So I told the feds what I wanted to do. 3 days later, I and Rafina were on a boat in Sardinia, Italy. We were getting ready to head to the sea to watch the dolphins. As soon as we entered the deep waters, we could see the dolphins emerging, and I saw her eyes sparkling. For a minute, I looked at her, and there was this rare innocence in her. But I was definite about my goal. I took out my phone and called her father, and gave the phone to her. She refused, but then I said, "This could be the last time you talk to him." She snatched the phone from my hand, all confused, and turns out it was the last time that she talked to him, in the middle of the sea, in the deep waters. She found out that her dad was shot by the feds. They wanted to bring him in, but he wasn't ready to give up. She was devastated and came in close and hugged me. I stood there for a second, and then she asked me, "Who would do such a thing?" As she was crying and holding me, I stepped back and broke the hug. I looked at her and smiled. It was me. I made it possible. I almost kind of knew the old man would panic, but really, the feds? He thought he could outrun the feds. He was way over in his hand. Well, God rest his soul in hell. She was furious, and as she tried to charge on me, the 2 men in the boat held her. I hired the men to make sure that she doesn't act the way she is. She looked at me. "Why would you do it? You're a murderer." I looked back at her and I chuckled. I did not murder him. He was killed because of his actions. He was a piece of shit. Do you know how many people has he killed or got killed? Because I know. I have their names. So, good riddance. Now her tears were all settled. So she looked at me and asked, "Who helped you?" And I looked at her excitingly and said, "Wouldn't you like to know?" And then I told the men to tie her up, and they did exactly what I said. They tied her up, and she was sitting down on the corner of the boat. Soon, another boat came in, and we all boarded the other boat. She was still sitting in the corner with her hands tied, and the boat was empty. It was just her, in the middle of the sea, in the deep waters. Now, I could have just killed her, but I wanted her to suffer. The boat had a bottle of water and supply that would last her 2 days. Now I gave her a choice: to come back with me and live like normal people doing normal things, or she can act like the tough gangster daughter she is and try to make out of the place on her own. She was stubborn, so she chose to stay back on the boat on her own. So in a way, I did not kill her. She probably did it herself. I came back a week later and took care of all the legit business Roberto had and married Talia. And for the next few years, enjoyed my life to its full extent. It has been 6 years since that incident, and today, I received a letter in my mailbox, a postcard from Sardinia that said, "Hey, husband,